let me start off by saying that Returnal is a very good game. The idea of taking a third-person shooter and mixing it in bullet hell patterns, structured as a roguelike, turned out to be an incredible approach that's had me addicted to the game. And yeah, Returnal, like many other sci-fi games, has taken a lot of inspiration from the Alien franchise. I've heard more people make the comparison with Metroid Prime, with the main character's ship crashing onto a treacherous planet and whatnot, but the vibe is more Prometheus than Metroid, to me at least. And before I go further into what makes Returnal so good, I want to preface this all by saying that as much fun as I've had with Returnal, there is a huge flaw with the game design that has completely halted my playthrough of the game. But first, here's why Returnal rules. Roguelikes are certainly polarizing. Some people absolutely love going through levels over and over, learning the enemy patterns, building up your arsenal, collecting currencies, exploring new paths, and ultimately mastering the game through trial and error. Some people absolutely hate having to play the same areas again and again, slowly getting stronger, dying frequently, all often at the expense of a deep story and rich character development. Both sides have fair points, and ultimately, it just comes down to your gaming personality. For me, roguelikes make gameplay dynamic and interesting. I enjoy playing a level or biome over and over again to see how things change the 5th time, the 20th time, the 50th time I play through it. Even better when there's procedural generation involved, keeping me on my toes and stimulating my mind each and every run. Games like Dead Cells and Rogue Legacy offer frantic gameplay and challenging platforming. Darkest Dungeon and Into the Breach are great rogue spins on turn-based RPGs, the latter acting more like a puzzle game with limited movement on a small grid. Alright, I think you get it. I like rogue-style games, and Returnal definitely hits the spot. As I mentioned previously, you play as an astronaut who crash lands on a planet. You wake up, you take your meek weaponry and health bar, and you voyage forward through a path of branching rooms, finding upgrades and searching for answers as to what this planet is and who, or what, is living there. When you die, you loop back to crashing your ship, and you start it all over again. There's a story here to uncover, but for me, it hasn't been all that interesting. The story is told through audio logs, interactive first-person gameplay bits, and text found throughout. It might be one of those stories where once everything is laid out on the table, I'll find it interesting, but playing through the game, it's gotten the least amount of my attention so far. What's way more interesting to me is the dynamic gameplay systems at play here. Enemies are alien creatures who carry different characteristics. Some enemies fly through the sky and teleport behind you if not eliminated quickly enough. Others slink rapidly across the floor and lunge in for melee attacks, and they all fire projectiles at you, but each type of enemy has its own different firing pattern, ranging from straight lines to spread shots and more. With each enemy dispatched, your weapon proficiency goes up, meaning that all weapons you find from that point forward will be more powerful. There are a few different weapon types in the game. You start with a pistol, but as you go forward, you'll find carbines, shotguns, and more. I was partial to the carbine myself, but there are modifiers that will make you think more deeply about keeping Old Faithful in exchange for a less comfortable weapon with a killer alt-fire attack. You also have a charge shot, and when your weapon overheats, you'll be given a reload gauge, similar to Gears of War and many other games that came after it. After you get a certain amount of kills, your adrenaline level will increase, increasing your weapon damage and giving you a bigger margin for error on your reload window. Your health bar is known as your integrity, which can be upgraded by finding health items while your bar is full, making every health item valuable even if you're in good shape. This is one of those design choices in this game that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy, but also amplifies my biggest issue with the game. But we're not quite there yet. I have more praise to heap on Returnal, so hang with me. Housemarque's use of the DualSense is pretty spot on. Not only do you get the haptic feedback of raindrops, foliage, footsteps, etc., they also make great use of the speaker and triggers. For example, after you've used your charge attack, the speaker will make a noise to let you know when it's available again. That way you're not having to pay attention to yet another thing on screen, which is great because there's already a ton going on as it is. The charge shot also extends to the triggers. Holding the left trigger down halfway will allow you to aim for a regular shot with your weapon, but pulling the left trigger down all the way will allow you to fire a charged shot. It all sounded very complex to me before I played Returnal, but they work great in practice. You're also awarded a melee weapon, essentially an energy sword, early on. Melee doesn't feel great and it's pretty basic, but it does offer a close range attack for those enemies who like to get all up in your face. This melee weapon can also be used to break down barriers and expose hidden items and passages. All put together, the combat is extremely fun and hectic. Battles usually only last a few minutes, meaning they don't overstay their welcome. You're given a dash mechanic that makes you temporarily invincible to attacks, so you'll be dashing a lot. Dashing is easy to use, but hard to master. It makes you feel like a god when you're able to dash your way out of a tough spot and blast the obolites out of an alien like a piñata. What are obolites, you ask? Well, there are two main currencies in Returnal. Obolites are pretty plentiful and you use them to buy upgrades for your current run. You mainly find them by defeating enemies, but you can also find obolite deposits just laying around. And there are secret rooms littered with the shiny orange dash, giving you only a few seconds to pick up as many as you can, like you're on an episode of Xenomarket Sweep. Once you have enough obolites saved up, and you found a few fabricators, basically vending machines, you can spend them all to beef up Celine and get ready for the boss fight, or, if you've got the guts, you can save them and fight on with what you have. Once you die, however, all your obolites disappear, and you start again with 0. There is, however, a currency that does carry over, and that's ether. Ether is much harder to find than obolites. You'll likely only find a handful per run, and can be spent on clearing a chest or item of malignancy, a substance that has a chance to give you a temporary debuff called a malfunction. More on this in a bit. It can also be spent to essentially give you a second life on your current run. You can also spend ether at the beginning of a run to gain a random item. You'll likely not find enough ether on your first run for it to be of much use to you, but being able to carry it over and pool it means that it will come in handy down the line. The last big collectibles are keys, which you probably guessed it, unlock locked chests and doors to branching areas. These are a little easier to find than ether, but they're still pretty uncommon compared to obolites. The rooms you explore are always the same, but how they're put together always changes with each run. When I walked into a room after playing for a while, I was able to recognize the scenery and realize what was about to go down. But when I hit those rooms was always a mystery until I actually discovered them. Something that I didn't realize before jumping into Returnal was how big of a role exploration plays in advancing in the game. From the reviews that I watched, they mainly focused on the combat, which is indeed a huge part of the game, but there are hidden paths you can't explore until you get a certain weapon, secret areas that hold loot, and more. A lot of my time spent on each run was just running around each room and making sure I didn't miss anything. Now, those malfunctions I mentioned earlier, they're a huge part of Returnal. A lot of items you come across will be malignant, meaning they're covered in this purple aura. If you choose to retrieve one of these malignant items, you'll be doing so at the risk of inheriting a debuff. Each malignant item tells you what the likelihood of you contracting a malfunction would be. Malfunctions range from cutting the damage of your weapon in half when you're in the air to causing an enemy to counterattack after being hit. Malfunctions can be removed by fulfilling specific conditions each one comes with, which can sometimes be as simple as opening containers to something a little more difficult like killing 10 enemies. If you contract more than 3 malfunctions at the same time, you'll have an ability disabled for the rest of the run, so be sure to get rid of these malfunctions as soon as you possibly can. And that brings me to parasites, which are items that come with both a buff and debuff. Most of the time, these parasites are not worth the debuff that they come with, but there are some combos that are very advantageous to you in your progress early on in the run, so don't write them off completely. There are ways to get rid of the parasites, they're not on you forever, so it's very much a weighted decision. Just talking about these gameplay systems makes me salivate. The way they all play off each other in a dynamic way makes each run interesting. Experimenting with the different weapon variations and parasites and trying to find the right combo for success pulls you into this gameplay loop, and it backs it up with gameplay that's easy to enjoy. Set all that against a haunting backdrop with great audio, and Returnal is a home run exclusive for the PS5, a system definitely in need of some fuel to keep the fire going. Except for one thing. One big thing. Returnal's long sessions and no checkpoint system means that it punishes you for having a good long run. Now, I'm not saying that the only issue with Returnal is this lack of checkpoints. There are definitely smaller things that need to be tuned and fixed, and it seems like people are having issues with the game crashing frequently, something I didn't necessarily experience myself. But even if those things get fixed, and they likely will, not having some sort of checkpoint system in the game means more pain and frustration. And it's not a good frustration like, oh, get good frustration. It's, this game is wasting my time by not having a good solution to me not being able to play for 6 hours straight kind of frustration. When you start Returnal, the game tells you to put the PS5 into rest mode if you need a break, as Returnal has no save feature, so turning the game off completely will cause you to lose most of your progress, and definitely all your progress on your current run. Okay, it's a roguelike, and that's how roguelikes are made, right? Makes sense. Well, not really. You see, those rogue-style games I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Dead Cells, Rogue Legacy, Darkest Dungeon, and Into the Breach, all have either shorter average runtimes or save options. And those games are all available for the Nintendo Switch, which has a great sleep function. The PS5's rest mode has been a bit controversial so far. It's unreliable to say the least, and unfortunately I was not immune to the wrath of rest mode myself. I had already played about 5 hours of Returnal and was getting the hang of it. I had already faced the first boss 3 or 4 times, so I was pretty familiar with the patterns. I took my time and explored the first biome to its fullest. I was able to gear up and head back into that fight with the first boss and beat it. I was pumped, ready to explore a new biome, which I did, until I had to put the controller down and go tend to something else. I put the PS5 into rest mode, and when I came back the next night to continue my run, the system booted up right to where I was, and it worked. I continued on, doing the same thing in Biome 2 that I did in Biome 1. I explored the hell out of it, finding everything I could to make the first encounter with boss number 2, one that I could at least survive long enough to learn all of its patterns, and, well, I was so well stocked that I beat boss number 2 on my first try, and it was time to go to Biome 3. Riding high, I forged on, getting myself acclimated to the new biome and the new abilities I had received as a reward. But not long after, I hit a wall. At nearly 1 a.m., I decided I was in no shape to continue, so I did what I had done the night before and put the PS5 into rest mode. And I had a pretty good night's sleep off of my triumphant run that had now totaled about 6 hours, 2 bosses beat, and a ton of upgrades and currency. That would be the last time I played Returnal until I had to capture footage for this review. I woke up the next morning, turned on my PS5, and my jaw hung open in shock. Returnal had shut itself down. My run was gone. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I believe the game auto-updated, and that was the cause of the forced shutdown, as developer Housemarque touted a new patch that same morning. Mayhaps, had I had auto-update off, I would still have my run and would still be playing Returnal, but instead I feel punished for having a good run, and that makes me feel terrible. It's just bad game design, which contrasted with all the great design choices that are plastered all over Returnal, makes it feel amplified. While I didn't lose all of my progress, my permanent upgrades and story progress remained, it was still a crushing blow. As runs go, I was in a groove, and I had it taken away from me because I chose health over Returnal. I'm all good with evolving the rogue genre the way that Housemarque has, and I'm definitely okay with rogue games getting a bigger spotlight, but nobody enjoys losing progress like that. If Housemarque can correct this, I can fully recommend Returnal as my favorite PS5 game to this point, which I know ain't saying much, but it would be hard for any upcoming game to nudge it out. One of my friends suggested having a checkpoint after defeating a boss, and when you die, that checkpoint is deleted, and I think that's a fine idea. Had I just had to go back to the beginning of the third biome and play from there, I'd still be annoyed, but I wouldn't completely shelf the game like I did to this point. It is indeed a major flaw in my opinion, but other than that, Returnal rules. Thank you so much for watching this vid. Just a heads up that I stream on Twitch occasionally, and you can find me over on Twitter at LexMarston. Until next time, this is Lex, signing out.